And if you'll let me know when the live stream is started, we'll get going.
We are live.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Todd Horsley. I'm the Director of Northern Virginia Transit Programs at DRPT, and I want to welcome you to the second elected officials briefing that we have held or are holding for the Springfield to Quantico Enhanced Public Transportation Feasibility Study. DRPT's Chief of Public Transportation, Jennifer DeBrule, was scheduled to give this presentation this afternoon, but a family emergency has arisen, and so we are going to go to our contingency plan. And Tim Roseboom, who is our project manager at DRPT, is going to give the presentation this afternoon instead of Jen. And Tim is probably the employee most intimately familiar with the project anyway, so there should not be any real difference in presentations other than the voice. So Tim will give the presentation. Just wanted to let everyone know that myself and Tim, Ciara Williams, who's one of our planners here at DRPT, who's also working on the project, as well as our consultants from Cambridge Systematics, will all be available to answer questions as at the end of the presentation or as we go. I'll let Tim kind of make that call. And then also want to acknowledge that Jennifer Mitchell, the DRPT director, is also on our call today. And so if Jennifer, I'm not sure if you want to say anything. If not, or if you do, you can turn it on over to Tim, and appreciate it.
Sure, just quickly, I just want to thank everybody for being here today. Also thank the team that's going to be giving the presentation, but really appreciate the opportunity for us to be able to give you this briefing on the what we've been calling S2Q, or the Springfield to Quantico Enhanced Public Transportation Study. And we are doing a series of outreach sessions like this for elected officials, and we really look forward to getting your feedback and hearing your comments. So thanks again, and Tim, I'll turn it over to you now.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks, Jennifer and Todd. So yeah, as Todd said, my name is Tim Roseboom. I'm the project manager, and I actually do have my camera on, but I have the audio for the meeting on my iPhone, so I think people might be seeing like a black screen or a phone number, but I am on camera if people want to see me. So like Todd said, this is our second elected officials briefing for the Springfield to Quantico study. We came to you back in March, and so this is just an update kind of where we are on the study. It's about 21 to 22 slides. There's a lot of additional slides in the back if people want to look through those at their leisure. So real quickly, this slide shows an overview of what we're going to cover today. Obviously intros, and then we'll be pretty heavily on alternatives definition, alternatives evaluation, and then we'll have a brief recap of the public outreach that you've had to date. So by way of background, this study was passed by the General Assembly. DRPT was directed to do this study in the 2020 session, and the language is actually on the screen. I won't read from it, but I'll call a few things to your attention. It does direct us to look at the corridor between the Franconia-Springfield Metro Station and the Marine Base Quantico. It talks about certain activity centers for Belvoir, Lorton, Potomac Mills. It specifies that we look at a blue line. It also specifies other multimodal options, and it suggests bus rapid transit. And then finally, it specifies a completion date of December 1st. So we are working towards that date. Also, by way of background, what you see on the screen are the study outcomes. I will actually just read this because I think that's the best way to summarize. So we're charged with developing a comprehensive objective evaluation of a range of potential future enhanced transit alternatives that compares cost, benefit, and impacts of each option to inform recommendations about future investment in the corridor. So that's our charge, and you'll see how that plays out later on in the study. So I had mentioned the December 1st completion date. What you see on the screen is the overall study schedule. We're right here in the middle of this red block, about 2/3 of the way through an 18-month schedule. And as I mentioned, we're pretty heavy into alternatives development and evaluation right now. We did just complete a public outreach process, and this meeting today is part of a stakeholder outreach. So I think the next slide shows our philosophy or our, kind of a visual representation of what the stakeholder outreach down here in the blue. That's meetings like this today. There's a technical committee. There are other, kind of one-off briefings that have been scheduled with various entities. And then you have the blue kind of feeds into the green, which is the traditional public outreach that we're doing through surveys, website, public meetings, all virtual to this point in the project. So activities that have been completed so far, there's been a website that's been up for a good 9 months now, I would say. There's project fact sheet on that website. We just completed, or shortly after the public meeting, we completed a survey. We got about 1,100 responses from the survey. And then we did have that virtual public meeting on May 4th, just a little over a month ago. We do have another round of meetings scheduled in late July, probably the July 26th or 27th, but we haven't finalized the date. And we'll bring forward a comparison of alternatives at that study. And then we'll have the final round of public meetings in September. And that's when we'll bring forward all the alternatives that are recommended for further study, essentially, or for the alternatives that are determined to be feasible. So recapping the May 4th public meeting, we did have, we felt like pretty good participation. There was over 100 people that registered. There was almost 80 that attended. There were 6 state or local offices that were represented and a number of public agencies, local and transit agencies, local government and transit agencies and regional agencies. So the corridor was very well represented. We had 30 zip codes in both Prince William and Fairfax, and there was a number of ways that people found out about the meeting, traditional things like email, Facebook, Twitter. We worked directly with some of the offices, the supervisor's offices in Prince William and Senator Soroval's office to promote the meeting. We did utilize captioning services, and we offered Spanish and Vietnamese, and that was based on the level of people who said that they speak that language primarily at home in the corridor. Those populations are very heavily represented in the corridor. We offered that, but it wasn't actually utilized. So recapping the comments from the meeting, this pie chart kind of shows you the broad themes. The most common was this orange section here that just was questions about study process and findings. The next most common was this maroon section here, where people were asking about service, access to stations, cost, which was primarily understood to be fares, and then service frequency. And then this kind of pink or light red section here, at just under 12% of the comments were specifically about metro extension. So there was a lot of interest in that in the corridor.
Tim, is that I'm not seeing that chart you're referencing on the screen.
Are you guys not? Okay, it's on my screen. Tom or Dahlia, can you? It says virtual public meeting, common themes. Are others seeing it? I can maybe.
Yeah, we're seeing the pie chart.
Yeah,
okay. We'll send this out. It's slide 9.
I see it now.
Okay, great. Okay, good. That makes me feel better because that's all I can see really. Okay, so here's on your screen again is a chart of the survey responses. And then just kind of the general themes, I guess, that emerged from the public meeting as well as the comment period that followed the public meeting. People generally thought that the areas that were being studied were the right areas. They thought rail service to Potomac Mills made sense. They thought a BRT extension to Dumfries, and then just general connectivity in Fairfax County to Fort Belvoir. General comments about access and frequency, and people really raised this issue of equity, which has kind of come to the forefront, in our country, certainly in the last year. And you'll see how we're addressing that later on in the study. People generally wanted the alternatives to be, studied relative to cost and their ability to gather ridership. Weekend travel is very important in this corridor. There's a lot of shopping destinations, weekend trips, things like that. And then finally, first and last mile is a big issue on the basis. So that came up in the comments. So another component of the study, which is kind of ramped up in the last few months, I would say, is there is a kind of parallel land use study. Todd had mentioned at Seattle William. Yeah, I'm sorry, is there a question?
Hey, Tim, this is Todd. I I've gotten some comments that there's a little bit of an echo on the YouTube broadcast. I was wondering, I don't know that we can fix that on the fly, but if you have a camera and a phone going at the same time, maybe turn your camera off and we'll see if that helps.
Yeah, let me turn my camera off.
If not, I'm not sure if we can fix it.
Maybe that'll help. Okay, my camera is now off, and I am muted. I'm muted twice on my laptop, so hopefully that's better.
Okay, so just thank you.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Yeah. So like I was mentioning, a land use study. Seattle Williams, who's DRPT's Northern Virginia planning manager, she is running that for DRPT. And these next two slides just kind of briefly go through the land use study. So this map here, this multicolor dotted map, shows what our major activity centers in the corridor. And I guess you have to zoom in a little bit if you know, when you see the PDF of the presentation. But there's a lot of activity centers represented in the corridor. So, and then on the left side of the screen, you see the activities that we've completed thus far. So there has been coordination with county staff in both counties. There's been an existing conditions analysis that was done. There has been potential station locations identified, and then you'll see this on the next screen, but future activities are to zero in on 10 station locations, 5 in each county, and then develop alternative land use scenarios in those 10 station locations, up to 3. And then for those alternative land use scenarios, to actually model and test the population, employment, development that would occur, and then use that information to feed the transit models and test the alternatives relative to each other. So this next screen shows you an example of what a multimodal district in Prince William County could look like. So here you have all the potential, some existing stations like Woodbridge VRE, and you could have a Marumsco station landing at Prince William. This area here is Potomac Mills, and then on down through to Northern Virginia Community College, which is an existing station and was an existing development and was identified for BRT. So you would essentially look at developing like a multimodal district, and there is a parallel that's being prepared for Lorton. I'm only showing the Prince William one essentially for because I'm trying to keep the time limited. So that's the land use study. As far as alternatives, that is where we are right now. We're in the middle of alternatives definition. So the 5 alternatives that you see on the screen, a Metro Rail blue and yellow line, a bus rapid transit, a VRE alternative, and then this express bus alternative here. Those are the 5 that are being developed for future testing, and you'll see on the next slide what I mean by future testing. So this map, I think we showed a version of this to you all at the last presentation. So this shows all of those, I guess you call them build alternatives or high capacity transit alternatives for testing. So here's the yellow line, kind of dark yellow, but that would start at Huntington. We would test it down through High Blue Valley, Fort Belvoir, and test it all the way to Dumfries. That doesn't necessarily mean you would bring forward a recommendation to go all the way to Dumfries, but you would test it to compare it to these other alternatives. And then a blue line that would start at Springfield, potentially serve North Fort Belvoir main entrance, Lorton, and then following the same alignment through Woodbridge, Potomac Mills, potentially to Dumfries. This purple line here is a potential BRT extension. Obviously, you have the project at Fairfax County is in development with now, and I think it's coming online before 2030. That would serve Fort Belvoir. So you would look at an extension serving Lorton, South Fairfax, Woodbridge again, potentially all the way down to Dumfries or Triangle. And then finally, this pink here is the existing VRE line. So it would have the new station here at Potomac Shores. It would have all the improvements that DRPT is contemplating in the transforming rail in Virginia. So you would have the 4th track, 3rd track through Prince William, 4th track through Alexandria and Fairfax. You would have the Long Bridge, and then the service inputs would be the VRE 2040 plan. That's what we're testing as far as service inputs. So this slide here shows kind of the philosophy of stations. So again, stations would exist for blue and yellow line extension, bus rapid transit, and VRE. You're looking at activity centers. They're generally within a quarter mile. In terms of transfers, you would have to look at existing and planned transfer station. You have to look at existing park and ride, and you would plan for future park and ride. You'd look at existing bus service. And then for transit stops, you'd also look at existing small area plans, projects like the Route 1 BRT, which have stops that are in the regional model. You would look at those. You would look at population and employment in all of these activity centers, and obviously you would take public and stakeholder input. So I think the next slide, I had mentioned the express bus alternative. This was developed separately, but it is going to be tested. This express bus alternative looks a lot like the OmniRide service that runs in the corridor from Prince William County today. You're looking at origins primarily in Prince William County, Lake Ridge, Dale City, Woodbridge, and then destinations in Alexandria and Fairfax County, Old Town, Tysons, Reston, Fairfax City, and Belvoir, which don't have existing OmniRide service right now. So like I said, that's being tested and developed. And then finally, alternatives evaluation. I think I'm only a couple slides from the end, and we can open it up to questions after this. So I mentioned those, remember those outcomes from the beginning of the study? Well, we took those and developed goals in which we're going to measure each of these alternatives, and you see them on the screen. So I had mentioned ridership, obviously, is a very important generator. You want to generate ridership. You also want to reduce congestion. That's always a major factor when you're doing anything in Northern Virginia, is the congestion reduction. Equity, I had mentioned equity is, as obviously has come to the fore in our country in the last year, but equity is something, meaning serving low income and minority populations. Transit has always had a benefit to those type of populations, but we want to kind of take special concern to make sure that we are providing a fair distribution of costs and benefits, and that we are serving the low income and minority populations that exist in the corridor today. Regional connectivity, that makes sense. I mean, you're looking at activity centers. Cost effectiveness, you're always kind of balancing, what's the most cost effective way to build and deliver a project. And then finally, development. That's where the land use study, feeds the alternative. So you'd be looking at development opportunities around stations. So finally, and I think we'll probably open up the questions after this, but our next steps, I had mentioned that we are planning public meetings in July. We expect to have elected officials briefings as well on the sort of outcome of those July meetings, and then when the draft recommendations of the study are being brought forward. We'll bring those forward in September. We'll have a draft for the public and for stakeholders to comment on. And then we're working towards this final report of December 1st. So I don't know, with that, maybe, Todd, I'll stop sharing. And maybe open it up to questions. Todd or Tom or Dahlia or Jennifer, if one of you wants to facilitate. Okay. I am going to stop sharing.
Okay, this is Todd Horsley again. Thanks, Tim. That's a lot of information we just shared. I did post the study website in the chat box. We will post this presentation to that website a little later this afternoon. We'll also email it to all of you on this elected officials briefing if we haven't already done that. And I think Supervisor Bodie asked that question, so hopefully I've taken care of that question. And let me see, I think we have a Senator Surabel. You have your hand raised, so let's go to you.
And so appreciate that information. The information on this comments or the whatever we got from the hearing was helpful. I think a lot of that, we just saw there was a lot of what we were already presented with. And so I was just curious in terms of sort of where things were on the assumptions that were being built into the study. Sort of where are we in terms of like population densities and focusing development? I mean, how are you all making decisions about where it's possible to focus development and density? Just to give you an example, I mean, I went through this in 2012 looking at the Yellow Line extension down Route 1 south of Hannibal Valley, and that was almost immediately ruled out, I think, because the local government did not want to have a conversation about parcel consolidations or the kinds of densities that needed to support metro in that part of the county. And it was ruled out right at the very beginning of the process. And so I don't have a lot of transparency into whether any of that's changed at all in the last 10 years. And I'm assuming you guys are having to make similar discussions or assumptions when you're trying to figure out feasibility in Eastern Prince William County and the various locations that you've looked at. So how is that process working? Because I don't have a lot of visibility into that.
So I would actually ask someone from the consulting team, either Tom or Dahlia, can you answer that? And I'm going to come back in on the iPhone with a camera. So Tom or Dahlia, can you answer that while I'm returning to me?
Sure, I'll start. So in the land use assessment that Tim did the overview on, we are looking at individual station areas in a lot of detail, working with the county staff. And I think we're trying to answer two questions is sort of what's realistic for these station areas in terms of what's there today. But we also want to answer the question, what would it take to support metro stations and BRT stations? So we're looking at densities there today, but we're looking at what it would take to be comparable to other stations that we have in the region. And then we're actually going to be using a tool called Urban Footprint, which allows us to play those what if games. We sort of take the station area and we can look at different place types. And the place type represents the density and the floor area ratio. And we'll be using that to come up with the land use scenarios that we're actually going to test with the model. We think that's a good way to go beyond what's in just the cooperative forecast that MWCOG puts out. I know sometimes the MWCOG forecast is very constrained based on what's out there today. We know that if you introduced fixed guideway transit, you're going to be attracting more development to this corridor than is in current plans. So that's the point of the land use study.
Okay. That's helpful, I guess. But I guess you're just basing it off the station locations then. And are you going to have a presentation that shows us if we have a metro station in, for example, Sacramento or Woodlawn or Potomac Mills or Lorton, that you're going to need this many buildings of this size and this density around this spot in order to do that? Is there going to be like a presentation to that effect to either us or the public at some point?
Yeah, we're doing a pretty deep dive on roughly 10 of the station areas. I think as Tim alluded to, we see a clustering of stations in the Potomac Mills area, and we see something similar around Lorton in Fairfax. And I think you're going to see a little more detail in those areas where we're going to be working with the county staff to look at what's in existing plans, but then also to sort of paint the brush in terms of what types of mixes of land use and densities seem possible and would be needed to support fixed guideway transit. And so that information will be available later in the study.
Okay, thanks.
And we'll make sure we present anything we have at our late July public meeting, but definitely in the September public meetings, we'll have that information. Delegate Watts, I believe you were next.
Yes, thank you. So another component of density is park and ride, where always transit in this area of Northern Virginia has to have collection points to achieve the density that we need to support the levels of service. So will you be looking at various options of park and ride, garages, blocks, whatever it required to help collect that density?
Tom, I'm going to let you take that one again if you don't mind.
Sure. We are, I think as we look at the stations, we're looking at density in terms of people that can walk to transit, but then to your point about park and ride, we already have a lot of success with park and ride in the corridor. We're going to build on that. And so for the metro alternatives and for the BRT alternatives, we are assuming parking at stations to allow for park and ride. What that does is expand what we call the catchment area, the people that can actually get to the station. So the station access is really important. And so we are drawing circles around each of these station areas. And so, quarter mile is where you have the most intense development and walk. Half mile is considered a comfortable walk to fixed guideway transit. But then we even go up to 2 miles for people that potentially could bike to stations. And we know with park and ride, particularly for end of line stations, you get people willing to drive pretty far to a station. So we are accounting for that in the travel modeling, and so we'll get a sense of the kind of ridership that's possible. And then keep in mind, we are looking at an express bus option, and express bus is really kind of a different type of transit than some of the fixed guideway we're looking at. I mean, express bus does, we do like to have a catchment area like a park and ride to collect as many people as possible at the home end, with the assumption that we're taking people to a downtown or to a major activity center at the work end. And so that was those express bus routes that we looked at. We'll definitely use park and ride for that.
Thank you.
Supervisor Bailey, I think you were next. And then Chairman McKay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Watts, for asking a question about the park and ride, because that was one of my questions, because I wanted to know what was the consideration there. But the other question that I had in your presentation was about the small area plans and how you're looking at those. Is that based upon the actual development and where they are in terms of the status of that? Or are you looking at future small area and, and how those types of plans are going to be developed going forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I did kind of, this is Tim, can you guys hear me okay? I did kind of glaze over that pretty fast. But so we did start by looking at all the current small area and comp plan in both counties. We worked directly with the county staff. And then there's essentially 3 future scenarios that are being studied. You're looking at sort of projected growth. We're going to do a land use that's a comp plan build out, and then we'll do one that's, I guess you call it like a transit-oriented development approach, where you're looking at if you could concentrate that development, if you could put it around stations, and if you could essentially increase density, what type of benefit would that have in terms of ridership? And then there'll be a whole economic side of it as well that looks at different like income, tax revenue, that sort of thing. Just the spending, property taxes, all that kind of stuff. And that's what Tom had mentioned, the urban footprint model. That's what that does. It looks at sort of future development scenario, and then how much tax revenue will be generated and how much ridership will be generated by the additional people and jobs on the corridor.
Okay, and then I have a second level question, Todd, if I may. My other question is, in your presentation, I certainly understand when you're talking about the lines and you're talking about Potomac Mills, you're talking about Woodbridge, I understand that. You said potential as it relates to Dumfries. So could you kind of explain that to me even more so? What do you mean by potential?
Yeah, so Tom, do you want to answer? And maybe we could actually bring up some of those maps on the screen again. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah. Do you want me to share my screen? I can do that.
Yeah. And while you're doing that, actually, I kind of skipped over. There are about 20 more slides that show a little bit more detail of each of these lines. And they're actually labeled like potential blue line extension, potential yellow line extension, and they show where stations might occur. So yes, I want you to go to like it's 26, I guess.
Yeah, and this is Todd. We will post the full 48 slide deck. Tim just went through the first 23. The rest was kind of supplemental information, but we'll make sure we post and send out all of those slides.
Yeah, so there's a map like this, and there's a version of this also on DRPT's website that's gone to a technical committee. But there's a version of this map for each of those 5 alternatives that we showed you. So the dark blue are potential stations, and then Tom, maybe you could explain like how the testing and refinement works.
So we're doing our initial testing with the full alignment with each mode. So we have Metro Rail going all the way to the Triangle area, kind of the gate to Quantico, and we're testing DRT down to there. But when we take a look at the results from this initial round of tests, There might be some refinement of modes. For example, it may make sense based on ridership levels to use Metro Rail up to a point in the corridor and then use BRT to connect all the way down to Quantico. And so those are the things we're going to work out once we see the results. But in this initial round of testing, we're doing the entire extent of the corridor, Franconia, Springfield to Quantico.
Okay, Chair, if that's the end, do you have anything else, Supervisor Bailey?
No, thank you for your replies. I understand better now. Thank you.
Sure. Chairman McKay, and then we'll do Supervisor Bodie.
Yeah, I have two questions. One, the first one, which I think is easy, is we spent a lot of time talking about the community meeting that was held and the outreach that's been done, but not a lot of time really talking about the 1,100 survey results. So I'm just curious, have those results already been distributed, and is there going to be an analysis of those survey results that we got? That's my first question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you, Chairman McKay. So, yeah, what happened was sort of like the survey went through May 17, and the public meeting was May 4th, and it was really just a timing issue. But there has been a report that's been developed about the survey responses. I don't see why I think we can share that. They were similar. They were somewhat similar. Tom or Dahlia, if you have anything else you want to add, but it was basically a timing issue when the public meeting response came before the survey response. So
yeah, we do have a summary of key findings we can send out.
I think it'd be helpful to see that because obviously we want to make sure that getting an equitable response from people. I don't know how involved the analysis of the survey is, and if it's done by zip code, it's done by other measures, but obviously it's going to be important to us to make sure that we're hearing from the larger community and not just a community. And so I do appreciate that being distributed. The second issue that I wanted to raise, because Scott said something earlier that I just want to make sure people on this call don't misunderstand what was said. The local government he was referring to was Fairfax County, and we absolutely supported rail to High Valley. The issue with the density is the real world issue that people in local government have to deal with, which is we have comp plans and we have communities of interest that don't want to be disturbed. And of course, when you change your comp plan to line up with the types of volume that you need to support heavy rail for a project of the length we're talking about, you could potentially have decades of land use decisions that are being based on inadequate infrastructure and communities of interest being displaced or just barreled through because a comp plan shows a rail line in an area. And frankly, we fully supported the rail line going to High Valley because obviously that's an extension from Huntington that we think is near-term doable and within the spectrum of reality. And so the current project on Route 1 widening, of course, envisions BRT connections south of High Valley with an opportunity to be able to convert to heavy rail further south into Prince William County in the future. And we all support and hope that happens. But I think we need to have a real conversation about land use comp plans at the county level. What happens to communities from the point in time in which something is approved until it gets built? Because in cases like this, it could be a long span of time. And how we protect those communities in the interim from an equity standpoint to make certain that we're not, barreling through communities of interest just because there's a long-range plan that shows a heavy piece of infrastructure that would require significant densities far beyond what is shown in today's comp plan. And so obviously I can't speak for Prince William, but I can speak for Fairfax and say we're fully supportive of a rail line connection into Prince William County, but we also have to be very cognizant of what the real world circumstances are for people who live in that corridor from the point in time under which we embrace a strategy like this to when it actually gets built and is in service. And I know there are other local government people on this call, but it's always a very difficult position at the end to approving land use cases with densities based on infrastructure that doesn't exist. And so help me understand a little bit more the timeline of this study and how you envision it lining up with what would necessarily would have to happen at a local level in terms of comp plans.
Yeah, I guess this is Tim. I guess I can maybe start, and Tom or Dahlia, one of you fill in. But so this study ends in December. The land use component that I had talked about is running parallel to the study. So the results of that urban footprint, the 10 station areas, that will all be delivered, when the final report of the study is delivered. I imagine there'll be some kind of appendix or supplemental report or something along those lines. And then at that point, we as a state would step back and turn to the counties and, say, okay, well, here's, what potentially could happen in terms of if you modify your land use. And I know Prince William actually was, looking at sort of proactively updating your comp plan. If what I'm understanding from county staff is accurate. I don't know if Seattle, or maybe Seattle has something to say. Yeah, I see Supervisor Bailey. Give me a thumbs up. Yes.
The only thing I'll add to that, Tim, is on the question of time frame is thinking about this is a long-term study. So our future horizon year that we're looking at for forecasting is out to 2045. So this is very much a long-term look at what improvements would be necessary from an infrastructure and a land use perspective.
Hey, this is Todd. I see Jennifer Mitchell has her hand up, so I'm gonna go to her first before we move on.
No, I just wanted to reinforce, I guess, that what Tim had said is, we're evaluating the feasibilities of some alternatives here, and we're providing the information about the feasibility of those alternatives, not necessarily making specific recommendations to the localities on land use patterns, but because it is something that we understand will be driven really by the counties as you all are updating your comp plans.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate that because that obviously is most certainly a local government function. And these studies are important for long-term planning, but they also are alarming sometimes to folks who we have to deal with on a daily basis, who are concerned about what's going to happen to their property. If they're going to be displaced, what's going to happen? Those are the kind of conversations we have to deal with people every day. And so I respect that. And frankly, I think it's really critical that local governments think about, long range when they implement these things in terms of their comp plans, because it changes everything from that point forward from a development standpoint. Sometimes very much for the better. Sometimes creates challenges that are really difficult to overcome on a case-by-case basis. And so I just wanted to make sure I got that explanation clearly. So thank you.
Okay. Supervisor Bodie, and then Supervisor Angry, and then Supervisor Franklin will follow. So Supervisor Bodie.
Sure. Thanks so much. And again, thank you for holding these meetings. This study is integral to our long-range planning for transit, transportation, and land use, so I appreciate this. I sort of have a three-part question, most of which sort of are related. My first piggybacks off of Chairman McKay's commentary about outreach. I know that Senator Cerebell and I in particular have been talking about getting a community meeting hosted somewhere in the Woodbridge, eastern end area of Prince William County. So whatever you all can continue to help us with that would be appreciated. I know that in the last call I had with you guys with my office, we talked about some potential locations, so we'll continue to compile those for you. Because I agree that we need to hear from a cross swath of folks in the community that don't always get reached out to, and especially with the digital divide there, we need to make sure we have in-person meetings, especially as more and more folks get vaccinated. My sort of actual questions sort of lie in from the equity piece, the environmental justice piece, and economic development. One, you guys talked about equity, but to me, a large part of equity, especially when it comes to transit and transportation planning, is environmental justice and how historically it's been low-income communities and communities of color who have had their communities been the targets and sort of the pave over areas because they don't have the resources or the means to fight condemnation cases, those sorts of things. So what is the idea there? Well, bringing transit and transportation to these communities without disrupting them too much from a condemnation and easement standpoint. Two, what is the greenhouse gas emissions sort of carbon footprint analysis of these different alternatives? And three, what is sort of, I know you guys talked about partnering up with the planning departments for our respective counties, but has there been outreach to the economic development departments for our counties, and how have they played in with the study thus far?
Sure. This is Tim again. Those are all excellent points. And Supervisor Bodie, your office was super helpful, in getting the word out. So thank you for that. I should also mention, I think our team is scheduled to be at the town hall that you and Supervisor Engry are holding tomorrow. So we'll be there talking to an audience there, and I would love to work with you on, doing more outreach to your district, 100%. As far as like an environmental justice aspect of the study, I think I showed the slide in the appendix. There's more detail about all the measures for all those 6 criteria. Normally what you would do in these type of studies is if you're moving forward into like design, you would do an environmental impact statement, and that's where you would address those environmental justice issues, the impact on low-income minority, like the physical impact of things like a maintenance facility. And that is not recommended for this study. If someone, to go to that next step, to go to preparing an EIS, that will be a logical next step. If, one of these, or, once a feasibility determination is made, going into some type of environmental work would be the next step. I think probably Tom, maybe the emissions question, I think, Tom, maybe you're better suited to answer that. I know it's calculated, I think, when we're doing the modeling, but I don't really know if it's specific. It's not really specific to like a regional goal or something like that. But Tom, you can probably explain better, where we are in terms of calculating greenhouse gas emission and climate change.
Yeah, I mean, at a high level, we'll be looking at impacts on VMT. So that'll give us a sense of whether these are transit improvements that are going to draw riders away from driving. And so we'll get a sense of the benefits that are provided. But we're not doing a detailed, say, air quality analysis.
Anything else, Supervisor Bodie?
Yeah, just my last question was, I know you all mentioned partnering up with the planning staff and the transportation staff, and those are obviously integral in that handshake between land use and transit. Have there been much outreach and collaboration with the economic development departments of our respective counties?
Yeah, Seattle's leading that component, but I think what I would say, this is Tim again, hopefully you can hear me better. I've actually closed down my computer. But we're really deferring to the county planning staff. There's the DOT staff are pretty well represented on the technical committee, and they, we sort of look to them as the point person for each county. They've lined up the planning staff, and we're really kind of trying to work within the county structure, I guess, is what I would say.
Just to add to that, as Tim said, we are working with the planning staff, both Prince William County and Fairfax County. I do believe that we have received some input from economic development staff, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, thanks.
I believe that's correct. Yeah, in both counties, the planners have brought in their colleagues from the economic development side.
Good to hear. Thank you so much.
Okay, and So I'm not sure that we actually said this, but when we were talking about our future public meetings, we are going to have, we're planning to have an in-person public meetings, actually 2 in-person public meetings in September. And so we will get back with you about potential locations for that. But our July public meeting, I believe we're going to continue to do that one virtually, and then we will do in-person meetings in September. Supervisor Angry, you were up next.
Yes. Hey, thanks a lot, Todd, for that too. First, I want to just say that apparently my software here doesn't have that little icon with the raise your hand feature, so I got to figure that out and get there. But so I will say I just have a couple of questions. One is I spent about a quarter of my military career on Fort Belvoir, and so question tying to that. Tying to also me being in the Knoxville District of Prince William County, is we talked about destinations, right? Final destination of transit. Is Fort Belvoir, as one of the largest employers of really a lot of this northern area, are they cooperating with this? And what I mean by that is, when you get the bus to the gate, is there coordination to get these passengers to their final destination? Say the hospital, say in and out processing, the large civilian population that works on the installation, as well as Davidson Army Airfield, where I spent half my career. And tied to that question is, if I look at Knoxville District, one of the things that Bob and I have been discussing when we start talking about last mile is I have a lot of inner depth neighborhoods that the buses don't get into, so my folks have to walk out to the bus stop. And the question is about, is there any kind of discussion about, that last mile shuttle vans or some form of transportation that's allowing, all of that transit to get folks? If we're really truly talking about bus rapid transit and getting folks from, from their, point of origin to the final destination. So that's just one question. Now I'll pause there before I get into the second question.
Oh yeah, thank you, Supervisor. This is Tim again. That was a great question, and I did kind of skim through it pretty quickly when I was talking about the technical committee. But both bases, Quantico and Fort Belvoir, they have representatives on this technical committee. As I think there is also a Pentagon representative. So we have heard from them. We've heard from them loud and clear. This issue of on-base circulation is always an issue when you're talking about bases. You're 100% correct. And then kind of local feeder service to get people from neighborhoods, to stations, or from stations to the base or back to their neighborhood. That's all kind of considered in the base model, I guess. What I would say, you assume some of these things are in place, like some kind of first mile, last mile, or on-base shuttle to model the ridership. The actual corridor is so long, that it really is kind of long distance travel, and there's a lot of within the corridor travel as well. But people are making pretty long trips, and one of the things that might make a difference between, let's say, if you're going to take, the transit from Triangle, maybe where you live, to Fort Belvoir, where you work, as an example, is if there's something to get you around the base. Like, some people wouldn't even consider it if they get to the base and they got to walk 2 miles, right? So, but yeah, that's a really good question, and it's something that keeps coming back and back.
Yeah. And if I could just add to that, that's why, I don't know if you've heard me talking about it, but I lost a lot of transit stops, even on our PRTC down here at the other end of Foley, because, the folks don't want to get stuck in the same traffic that's, trying to get out. So we've been looking at a dedicated bus lane to try to get ridership back on buses to actually move up a corridor in a direct, VIP access, if you will, to get from this location all the way, let's say, to the Pentagon, let's say to Fort Belvoir, let's say to these installations, so that we have a direct more means of getting folks. This is how we want to get them back on these, public transportation. So I'll throw that piece in there. But the second question is, when you pulled up the slide and talked about the metro stops and coming down all the way down to, I think, proposed Dumfries, how are those routes developed? I don't know if you have an answer to that. I'm just curious how the routes were actually developed in the routes that they're going currently.
I think that's probably somebody on the consulting team, either Tom or Dahlia.
Sure. As we've talked about, we looked at a combination of factors. We looked at the activity centers that are there today, as well as planned activity centers. We looked at existing transportation facilities, making those connections to VRE, obviously connecting to the metro. And generally looking at density, what we're trying to do is connect the activity centers and really generate the most ridership possible. So we had come up with some initial thoughts on that. We've worked with the technical committee. We actually shared this image at the public meeting as well. So we've gotten some feedback to kind of confirm and generally did make some refinements based on the feedback we got from stakeholders. But generally, people felt like we were hitting the important activity centers. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. In the interest of time, I'll probably reach back out to you, Thomas or Todd, and I just had some ideas of some thoughts. But in the interest of time, I won't belabor this conversation. So, but thank you for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Supervisor Franklin, and then Chair Wheeler, and then back to Senator Surville.
Sure, and I'll make this very quick because I know we're probably approaching time, but, and I think actually Senator Surville may have hit on this just a little bit, but wanted to ask about density requirements, or what we think density requirements will be, particularly as we talk about metro. As you all know, in Prince William County, we're working on several land use plans that will effectively spread density out throughout the county instead of packing it in certain areas. And just wondering what you all think those requirements will be to get metro, and then some other types of transit systems. And then, is Prince William County close to what you think those metrics are?
I think I'm going to ask somebody from the consulting team, unless the auto wants to respond.
Yeah, I'll actually defer to either Tom or Dahlia.
Okay.
Thanks, yeah.
Yeah, I think some of what you're asking is definitely the type of information that we're trying to pull together with the land use assessment. So we want to understand not just density today, but what density could be, and then comparing that with different, say, metro stations, just to get a feel for it. There's some general rules of thumb. Usually you're talking 10 to 15 dwelling units per acre to support, fixed guideway transit of this nature, in terms of very frequent fixed guideway. But we also know from looking at metro stations around the region that there's not necessarily one station that fits all the criteria. Some are more job focused. Some at end of lines have more park and ride to help, bring in more riders. So that's why we think that deep dive, looking at the station areas and trying to figure out what's feasible in each of these station areas, will help address that question. But those are exactly the questions that we want to answer, which is what would be required to support Metro Rail, what would be required to support BRT.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Todd, I think
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Anything else, Supervisor Franklin? And if not, we'll go on to Chair Wheeler. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you. I was sort of waiting, and I didn't know. It was like, are you on kind of thing? I didn't really think. I mean, this is always where we come to. The chicken and the egg. If you build it, they will come. But you don't want to commit to it until you know that it's coming. And I just want to sort of acknowledge that it was a new day in Prince William County, and I know for a long time that this wasn't even something considered because we wouldn't commit to the densities. But of course, if we knew we were going to get BRT or a metro station, even after we finish our comprehensive plan, some years down the road, I'm sure we could adjust those plans to make sure that it's. And so if giving some guidance on what those densities are to make that happen, it will be just really useful. So it's a new day in Prince William County. I just want to say that out loud. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Surville, you're up next.
Thanks. Thank God it's a new day in Prince William County. I want to follow up on what Victor asked a second ago, which he was asking about Belvoir. And again, I think the the results you get from your testing is only going to be as good as the assumptions that you put into the model. And if the assumptions you put into the model say that everybody's got a 2-mile walk when you drop them off the front gate at Fort Belvoir, then it's going to show nobody's going to take transit to Fort Belvoir. So I'm not clear on exactly how you all are modeling transit in and out of Fort Belvoir in order to develop these recommendations, or whether or not your recommendations are going to come back and say, you know, under these set of assumptions, this works with Fort Belvoir in the middle, and under these set of assumptions it doesn't, or that one key to this entire solution is Fort Belvoir has to get some kind of circulator of its own going, or if Fort Belvoir can develop a circulator, then all this works in general or whatever. So, I mean, can you describe for me sort of exactly how you're modeling that? Because if we're assuming, again, we're just dropping off the door and it's a 2-mile walk, then your assumptions are going to be that nobody's going to use transit to get to Belvoir. That's your model.
Yes, I think that's, that's a good question. I think probably Tom or someone from the consulting team.
Yeah. So following kind of the current protocol for BRT and Metro Rail alternatives, we're assuming you would have to transfer to a shuttle bus that would circulate around the base. But for express bus routes that begin or end in the base, we're allowed to have them go directly into the base because that's the current approach with bus routes. So that's our assumption kind of going in at this point. We recognize and we're making sure that there are good connections at all the stations, but particularly with the bases, we recognize that's an obstacle.
Okay, Belvoir has not had a heart attack or a stroke about any of those assumptions, because I know, for example, when Supervisor Principe was trying to push his fast ferry, one of the reasons it never worked was because Belvoir refused to entertain the thought of a ferry dock or whatever. They didn't want all those they didn't want to have to set up a separate security checkpoint on the river for people coming in by a ferry. And so I would think if you're going to have an express bus going in, you know, you either screen them at the front or screen them at the back, and there's all those screening headaches involved, right? So, I mean, they haven't, Belvoir hasn't said, no dice to any of this stuff yet?
No, nor have they committed to doing any of it yet. Which, as far as I understand it, is par for the course with DoD. But from our understanding with coordinating with them, in theory, so long as a bus route is starting or ending on the base, then they should be able to find a way to circulate on the base. If it's going through, that's where you start to have the real challenges, because they don't want folks coming through.
Got it. All right.
Okay. Colin Davenport. I think you're from Congressman Connolly's office.
Hi, everyone. Really my question is almost exactly what Chair Wheeler asserted, because my staff mine was going to be a question on the assertion. What I was going to ask is, when COG does their studies like this, Thomas on the land use studies, they will sometimes do projections based on like a menu or a cafeteria plan of policies that a particular governing body could implement. So, what's the level of cafe standards being implemented? What's the gas price? What's the upzoning occurring in a particular area? So, to feed that process that Chair Wheeler mentioned, will the land use study, instead of, when you say we're going to look at what would be required to support Metro or BRT, are you just looking at, okay, well, what are the development, residential employment projections, in the out years? Or are you saying what would be required, as in what are the policy decisions by the local boards that would be required to accommodate Metro or BRT stations at those particular points?
Tom is talking, but he's on mute.
I think it's a consulting team question, yeah. Or Sally, go ahead.
So I'm happy to take it for him. So we're doing actually, as Tim had said earlier, this land use side of the study is being conducted in parallel with the more standard feasibility study. So we will be doing sort of one set of analyses using those standard MWCOG forecasts that you talked about. But that parallel process, that land use study, will be looking at a different set of land use forecasts to try and get at the answer to the question of what would be necessary from a land use perspective in order to make these options a little more feasible from a ridership perspective. So there will be both of those happening. And we'll report back on results for both of those.
Thanks.
And Supervisor Stork, you are up next.
All right, thank you all. Sorry I got on the call late. First, I want to make a just comment about Fort Belvoir. The current Rex line runs into Fort Belvoir, and it seems to have been. I know they've been doing that for quite some time. So there is some exceptions that they've made. I also know that as part of the discussions that I've had with the commanders there, that at least the newest commander was wondering how that was possible, but the previous commander, and I know for many years, Rex has run in and out of it, so I don't know what that means ultimately, but I think it is possible. I think there's definitely a system for doing that. The question is whether or not DOD is willing to, I guess, adopt or support that. So, and I would say that I think it is an essential part of making it all work, but ultimately I think the metro to that area would be invaluable for Belvoir, given all that they're doing. And I guess the other part I would say to that, all that they're doing, frankly, to reduce the number of gates that they have open and, frankly, their cost to maintain those gates. I don't know if you know, but they're getting ready to shut down Kingman Gate with some exception, but essentially shutting it down for lots of reasons that I'm hearing, but the real reasons, or the reason that they're saying, is that they don't have the staffing to do it. So that would mean that we have 3 gates down at Fort Belvoir, which obviously, if you want to reduce your long-term costs, maybe there's a way of doing that, which would obviously increase the amount of mass transit that goes there, and obviously there's advantages to that. So that was just more of a statement I wanted to make. And I apologize, I got on late, but I don't know if you all addressed or discussed the impact or the consideration that was being given to VRE as part of any of the routes that would be proposed and all the decisions that are made.
Yeah, thank you, Supervisor Story. This is Tim again. So VRE is one of the alternatives. I think, Tom, the screen you have up right now shows the VRE line in pink. And it is one of the alternatives that's being tested. It assumes all the capital improvements associated with the transforming rail in Virginia, the long bridge, the 4th track, and it assumes higher service levels than today. It essentially assumes the VRE 2040 plan service levels, which is all-day service or frequent service, bi-directional service. Yeah, thanks for the question.
And I kind of understood that part of it, but I guess what I was trying to get at is how is that being weighed into the decision about, blue line or yellow line, et cetera?
Oh, yeah, okay. So we're not really planning to pick one alternative or one recommendation to bring forward as better than all the others. What we're planning to do is show something that is feasible for each of the alternatives, and we feel like that's the charge of the study. Not necessarily to pick, one of 4 or one of 5 that's the best, but to show a feasible alternative for each. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and okay, that's fine.
And that being said, when we talk about ridership potential, we're also looking at how does ridership potentially shift between modes. So if we do, say, look at, for example, a blue line extension, does that take riders away from VRE will be something that we're looking at.
Right, that's a good point, don't you think?
Sure.
Yeah, this is Todd again. I'll just add to what Tim said. This is a first feasibility study of the alternatives that are being evaluated. So, we will our final report will basically be an evaluation of each of these alternatives and tell you what's feasible and what the approximate range of cost or order of magnitude is, and then there will be follow-on studies to determine if one of these is something that the region would like to advance. Senator Surville, I can't remember. Is your hand up as a residual or is that a new question?
Residual, I'll take it down.
Okay, so Chairman McKay, I think you had taken your hand down and now it's back up, so I'm going to let you.
Yeah, I just wanted to be very brief and follow up on this Belvoir bus issue because I think this is something we should plan for aggressively. We can't change, DOD standards, but we're not just running the RECs in there. We also run a bus line from Franconia, Springfield that we stood up a few years ago to the base. And we also know that there's a ton of people who ride the VRE to Lorton and carpool over to the base. And frankly, if there was a more direct way to get people from the VRE into the base, we would drive even more ridership into VRE. And so this is a moment where I think, our infrastructure can also put some pressure on the post as to what they do. The challenge they have right now is while we're bringing people into the post, it's not of significant volumes enough for them to really invest in any infrastructure to help process that and to help run shuttles on the post. Let's keep in mind that we have heavy rail going literally right to the Pentagon. And so if we have the service, it does push a little bit for the infrastructure that's necessary. Belvoir is scattered and spread out, as Supervisor Angry was mentioning earlier, which makes it tough. But in our conversations with the base, if they had the volume of transit riders coming in to justify their own circulator system, that's not out of the realm of possibility. I'd hate for us to not be aggressive in looking at that potential just because there's some resistance there now. It's a supply and demand thing for them. And I think we should treat it that way for the purpose of good urban planning in getting people to the post. It's only going to grow as a employer base. We do know that. That's all that's happened to it in my lifetime, and that's all that will happen in people in the next couple decades at Belvoir. DOD has made it clear it's a base of growth as we move forward. So I just want to make sure we have that in the right context. That's all.
Excellent. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, I don't see any other hands raised, but certainly don't want to cut off a great conversation. So if anybody else has questions, speak now or raise your hand.
No, Todd, I would just like to again thank everybody for participating today and giving us a chance to answer some of your questions as well. This is very helpful for us to get your input, and also for us to be able to give you some more information about what we're doing in the study. So if you all do have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. Contact myself, Tim, or Todd as well. If we don't, hopefully you do have our contact information. We'll make sure that you do. But please let us know if you have any other questions.
Mine is actually on the website if people are, my email is on the website, but sorry, go ahead, Todd.
Supervisor Bailey, I see your hand has gone back up.
Thanks, Todd. I just wanted to, just in echoing what Ms. Mitchell said, it's so important that we feel like we are included in this process. And so we really appreciate the opportunity to voice our opinion and appreciate just the update, so we'll know as we're progressing with our respective districts, and not only that, but land use cases across the county and transportation opportunities, that we really are accountable to making sure that this is a success. So this is great. I just wanted to say that.
Well, thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, great. Thanks. We will, like I said earlier, we will make sure we will send out this the full slide deck to everyone, and we'll make sure our contact information is included in that as well. And then we'll also post it to the DRPT website. And I've posted that link in the chat box a couple of times. So Tim, Ciara, Tom, Dahlia, anything else before we close? If not, we will let everyone go and enjoy your afternoons.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
nothing from me.
Okay, great. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. All right.
Thanks, everyone.